Welcome to Finding Hope, The End to Suffering. Hosted by psychologist, author, and co-founder of the Colorado Institute for Conflict Resolution and Creative Leadership, Dr. Barry Weinhold, with national radio host, award-winning producer, and inspirational speaker, Patricia Raskin.
Well, hello, everyone, and here we are. I'm the co-host, Patricia Raskin, with Barry Weinhold, of this wonderful series called Finding Hope, The End to Suffering, and created by Barry Weinhold, who is a PhD psychologist who's written over 60 books on the subject, and who really felt that he wanted to show people these stories rather than just doing therapy and sharing with people. It has much more power when we can share a real story from someone. And Barry chose this month to really look at film and how we learn from film. So Barry, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I think in the previous 3 months, we really had some powerful stories about people who had fairly dysfunctional childhoods and how they overcame the suffering that they experienced in those childhoods. And but wait, let's look at this theme in a little different way this time and look at how film portrays a lot of the same things. And I also talked about in the other episode about mirror neurons and the fact that we really, when we watch a film, we empathize with the characters in the film, and we can learn something about ourselves. And I think that's what the attraction of film is, that gee, maybe I can watch this film and learn something new about how to deal with the suffering that I'm having in my life. And the films that George has picked, I think, are great for illustrating that. And so I'm anxious to hear him now talk about the third of the series that he's focused on, which is Moonlight, which really focuses on how, hi George, focusing on how this young man growing up in South Miami in a very abusive situation of not only abusive home, but abusive culture, where he was a small guy and he got picked on and bullied by everybody, and he had to hide all the time in order to escape this gang of guys that were always waiting for him after school to pick on him. I have some empathy for that because I was bullied. I was a small guy for a long time. I was in eighth grade. I was 5'1", and then actually in ninth grade, same. I was 5'1", and then I had a growth spurt between ninth and 10th grade to where I gained almost 10 inches in 1 year.
Wow. Wow.
I had literally growing pains. My bones ached.
Wow.
And now I'm 6'1".
Wow.
But I can identify with the character in that movie because I hated being small, but there was nothing I could do about it.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, welcome, George. George, tell us a little bit about yourself again for people who are just entering our conversation.
Thank you, Patricia and Barry. I think, by the way, Barry, all of us have a little tiny person inside us. You can't believe we ever grew up and learned how to read and write, and maybe or some people don't read and write that well, but learn whatever it takes to be a grown-up. So I'm George Butte. I've taught English and film studies at Colorado College for a long time, 40-odd years. My primary professional interest is in narrative theory, how we tell stories in fiction and film, and how those stories work, particularly in complicated, ambiguous ways. We talked the last two sessions about particularly complicated movies that people often misperceive because they don't want to look at the hard parts of those movies, the Peter Pan story and Hitchcock's Rear Window. It's hard to watch Moonlight 2016 without getting the hard parts. And it's, to me, amazing that won the Academy Award for Best Picture in 2016 because it's not a Hollywood studio movie. It's slow. The edits are slow. Hollywood movies usually move faster. There are no white people in it at all. It's very much a world in this, as the A.L. Scott, the New York Times critic, said, I had to see it 3 times to realize there are no white people in this movie. It's a world that's very limited and very, very structured in hard ways. And so, and then Sharon, the main character, is gay. and he lives in a world that's very homophobic. The first scene we see, he's about 8 or something, running away from other kids taunting him for being gay. And he asks the man who kind of helps save him, he says, "What does the word faggot mean?" So they're already insulting him, even though he doesn't really quite know that he's gay or hasn't identified that. So in the 3 segments of the movie, each about 45 minutes long, in his life at 8, about 16, and about 28. And they're very powerful studies of his life and how he struggles. In the first section, for example, he is saved somewhat by this drug dealer, a guy named Juan. The actor won Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, brilliant performance. And because Juan sort of helps him and loves him. And then if you'll pull up the first shot, Juan, it's a famous shot from the movie, Juan takes him out in the bay and really kind of baptizes him. And this very moment, he has this great line. He says, he goes by Little at this point, he says, "Little, you're in the middle of the world." What a phrase. You're in the middle of the world and you can be okay. It's an incredible moment. And so at the end of this segment, the wound gets even deeper because Juan betrays him in one sense. Little turns to him at the dinner table. He's at dinner at their house and he says, "You sell drugs to my mama, don't you?" And Juan says, "Yes, I do." That's the end of the first segment. The wound of abandonment. His mother's a drug addict. His father figure sells drugs to her. So in the second episode, he's in high school and he's at more abuse and very difficult. He finds one other man, Kevin, that he touches. He has his first homosexual experience. And he doesn't have another one for like 10 years. In the third episode, he finally goes back to find Kevin. And along the way, he has a meeting with his mother, who's kind of cleaned up. A very powerful scene. She looks at him and he's kind of making his way. He's become a super bodybuilder. And in fact, what you see is he's become Juan, the father figure who loved him but also betrayed him. He has Juan's super ego body. He has Juan's car. If you remember, you'll know the car. He has a little crown logo, little figure on the dashboard of the car. And he's a drug dealer too. But he talks to her and she says, "You don't have to love me." So they come to terms kind of with each other. Then he goes to find Kevin. And it's hard. There's a long scene. Kevin's managing a restaurant. He's been to jail. He doesn't want to go back to jail. So he's trying to teach Chiron that maybe he should not be a drug dealer. At the end of the movie, they make love. And let me see the second episode, the second shot. And this is held a long time on the screen. It's a very beautiful, that's Chiron as a grown-up on the left and Kevin on the right. And it's a beautiful moment of being held. I don't think we've ever seen Chiron be held before. And it's a long moment, very touching and very, very physical. And then the very last shot of the movie is the next one, where we go back to see Chiron as a boy looking over his shoulder. And that's the end of the movie. Yeah. So have we found peace? We found love. What's his journey? Chiron is just beginning to figure things out. He's got a long way to go, but they held each other. Yeah. And I always find myself just melting at that moment. And is the little boy coming home? Is the little boy still looking for home? Because there's a little, Barry, he didn't know he was going to do this, but he just opened the door for me. There's that little boy in us, maybe a little girl and Patricia. There's that little child in us that always wonders, can we find our way home?
Yeah, that's a big issue for a lot of people. And home is obviously a metaphor for finding who we really are. I mean, our true identity. And that's what, in the end of this movie, seems to happen for Chiron.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Barry, I think my question to you around this is how you work. You said you work a lot with men. How you work with men who are maybe coming out and they're, it's a hard thing for them. How you help them?
Well, it's obviously an individual thing. Everyone has their own suffering that they have to go through to come out. I mean, and even today, where being gay is much more acceptable than it's ever been, we still, I mean, men have an awfully hard time admitting that. I mean, it starts very early for men of being, you know, in the locker room, being accused of being gay and made fun of, and I mean, even if you're not gay, I mean, if you look gay, I mean, like as a early adolescent, I had blonde curly hair. Everybody assumed I must be gay because I had blonde curly hair, and I certainly was not. I'm not gay, and yet it was something I had to deal with personally because I heard all of the you know the slurs and the name calling and everything that Jerome has to deal with in this movie. So I really was identifying with him a lot. George, in looking and picking this movie, what did you identify with the most?
I think for me, it was that lost child. I mentioned this in relation to Peter Pan. My own sense of not being able to count on my parents. I had two parents and a very troubled sister in the home, but it was a home of chaos, a home of tremendous emotional turmoil. And there was nobody that I could count on to help me. I had nobody. I was the Rock of Gibraltar. And as I mentioned before, that was very seductive to me. And I think you see this in the movie. Chiron walks his own way and he learns to make himself. And that's very seductive. And except it ends up walling you off from other people. But I loved being the one, I mean, not loved. Well, I did. I think at the time I thought being in charge was really, I mean, when you're 9, 10, 11, 12, and you're the man of the house, I mean, it's kind of seductive. And certainly Chiron is the man of his house.
Yeah.
But we see then how hurtful that is.
What the suffering that comes along with that amounts to. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so you have to grow beyond that and to realize part of it, and I may see this in the last shot of the movie, part of the journey is to find some way to contact that early child and kind of hold him again or hold her again.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how you can try to do that in various ways to nourish that child who was lost and who was not held enough.
Right. Yeah, I mean, inner child work is a big part of what I do with men and women. But I work mostly with men, but sometimes with couples. But the men that have lost their little boy, that's one of the things I really try to get them in touch with and help them see that there is a wounded little boy in there that you've been trying to protect. And he has some things to say. Sometimes I ask even men to do a little dialogue, like put their inner child on a chair and talk to them, and ask them, you know, what is it you need from me? What is it you want from me? How can I help you? How can I help you be to heal the wounds that you suffered early on in life? And I've had men who didn't done that work and ended up in a pool of tears as they connected with their inner child. And I think that's sometimes the breakthrough is about the sadness that we feel when we really understand how disconnected we've been from our inner child.
Barry, do you think it's harder for men with the inner child than women? Because, women are supposed to be taken care of, and that's okay, but men are supposed to be strong.
Yeah, men are supposed to be strong, and talk about the inner child with men is a challenge sometimes. And some of the men don't want to go there right away, but I try to get them at some point. I find an opening for them to look at their life that way. About what would your inner child say about this? You know, what do you think your inner child is feeling when you're drunk, or you're being abusive, or you're being an a-hole? You know, and I'm sometimes I can get people to really start to think about it that way. That there is and it's like there's a part of us that, and I kind of talk about this as our shadow, and the Jungians talk about this, that our inner child is really our shadow is really our inner child. And sometimes,
Yeah. Yeah, I have a question because I know we're kind of coming to the end. So my question, George, is that we've talked about 3 movies, right? We've talked about Rear Window, and then we talked about, what was our second movie? No, that was our second movie. Peter Pan, Rear Window, and then Moonlight. Where do you see all of this sort of tying together for us? Just if we watched all of it in terms of understanding ourselves and having us find hope and end suffering.
Well, I think identifying those wounds and not running away from them is a key piece of it. More I think about Sharon, too, just to add on what Barry said, I think the father wound is key.
yes,
It's been true for me, the loss of the father. And that's true for, I was going to mention a couple other movies, and this one of my favorites that people think of as a thriller, but The Silence of the Lambs, the great Jodie Foster movie, where the wound of that movie, of course, is the death of her father. And Hannibal Lecter turns out to be a kind of surrogate father. It's a great movie about the father wound. I think identifying the wounds, being able to not avoid them and not be afraid of them is a key first step. And it's very, very hard, particularly when you've told a story to yourself in your earlier life that was really seductive and very satisfying. And then you have to realize that that story really misled you.
Barry, your comments on that. That's the work you do.
yeah. Well, actually, in my latest book, which I didn't get time to talk about today, but next time I will, it's called Intimate Combat. And the subtitle is Conflict Resolution Skills for Couples. And in there, I talk about the fact that people in relationship are often avoiding conflict because they don't know 2 things that I found that are important for people to know. First of them is to know that whatever conflict they're having in the current situation has some kind of connection to unresolved conflicts from their past. And if they can understand that maybe what they're experiencing now in this adult relationship, the conflict they're experiencing, has roots back to when they were 3 years old or 5. And when you get a couple to understand that, they build compassion towards each other. They see the wounded child. They see the wounded child in each other for the first time. And that's a remarkable breakthrough when you do that for a couple. And then the second one is, and the book really focuses on how to identify that element. How do you help couples find that piece of your history that you brought with you to the relationship and is now showing up as a conflict. And once they do that, then they need some skills. That was the second thing that I found that couples needed. So the book is full of what I call worksheets, step-by-step processes that you can run off copies, and each one has a copy. And we got this conflict to deal with, and so let's take step 1. What's your part? What's your part? And they go right through it step by step. And it's the most complete and practical, down-to-earth way to talk about how to deal with these conflicts in relationships.
I mean, George, I'm thinking they could use Barry's book and watch some of these movies you mentioned, Rear Window and Peter Pan, Moonlight, and just like take notes. And how do you see it? And how do you see it? You can look at things that way too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, George. If people want to contact you or write to you, or how would they do that? How would they find you?
They could just write me my email at Colorado College. It's GB, all faculty, every staff person is first initial, last name, GBUTTE, whatever, at Colorado College, one word, .edu.
Okay, thank you so much. And Barry, it's always an honor and pleasure to work with you. Barry, any closing thoughts for today?
Well, again, thanks, George, for bringing your wisdom to this format.
It was wonderful.
And reaching out to our audience with new ways to look at films. I don't think after hearing these podcasts, people will view films the same way.
That's right. That's right. And Barry, next time in our next series, what are we talking about?
Well, next month we have a very interesting situation. We have a woman who experienced extreme tragedy in her life. She had, in a period of a very short time, she had a house burned down to the ground that, it was mostly an estate, almost 10 acres.
Mhm.
And then within a few months after that, her husband committed suicide.
Mm.
Father died. Her son committed suicide.
Mm.
Her mother died. And I think there was another one, another relative that died. And she wrote a book called Six Funerals and Six Funerals and a Wedding. Her name is Mary Odgers, and she'll be our guest next month to talk about her story and how she found hope after all this tragedy in her life. And it's a remarkable story. And she is the most upbeat person you ever want to meet after all this.
Yes. Great. And Barry, tell us again, if people want to be part of this and keep this show going, about how they can participate in that.
Well, the easiest way be on this site. There is where there's a place where it says about the show, and there's a whole list of descriptions of what we're doing. At the end of that is a place where you can make a donation. And at the end of the donation description is a link that you just have to click, and it takes you right to the page on our website where you can make the donation.
All right. Well, thank you. It's been an honor and pleasure. Thank you, George, and thank you for the opportunity to co-host with you, Barry. It's wonderful. I learned so much each time.
Yeah.
And until next time, again, and you can visit Barry's website at weinhold.org.
And there is information on the podcast and how to donate on that website as well.
Great. All right, everyone. We're going to say bye for now.
Bye.
This episode was brought to you by the Colorado Institute for Conflict Resolution and Creative Leadership. Find out more about these resources at weinholds.org. Dr. Weinhold is the author or co-author of 75 books on psychology, including his latest book, Get Real: The Hazards of Living Out of Your False Self, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and more. Patricia Raskin is the host of the nationally recognized program, The Patricia Raskin Positive Living Show, and is currently heard on voiceamerica.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. New episodes of Finding Hope: The End to Suffering can be found every Wednesday. If you like the show, please leave a review and give us a rating.